Splash photography is exciting, fast-paced, messy and creative. What's not to love? In this video, we're going to look at what you need to get started in splash photography, how you can get great results simply, why the pros shoot splash images and where they're used, and the sort of kit needed from budget to high-end that you need to do it. I'll also talk you through some useful accessories that will make your splash photography easier and better, and share a few creative ideas for you to try. So let's start off looking at the work of some experts in splash photography, myself included of course, and let's find out what they shoot splash shots for. Splash shots are used regularly in advertising images to add dynamics, excitement, and a sense of anticipation to advertising images. I'm friends with several top pros who shoot splashes and liquids. Let's take a look. Barry Macario shoots and composites some great splash images. Here's some of his images used in advertising photography work. David Lund is another friend and colleague who has shot some big campaign images and smaller campaign work, and he loves playing with liquids and creating a mess. Jonathan Knowles is one of the best known advertising photographers in London, and his images are instantly recognisable, and they're used across a range of advertising from drinks companies to telecommunications, food and cosmetics. Many of his images you will recognise from high-profile advertising campaigns. All three photographers have been guests on my show on Carl Taylor Education, revealing their secrets and giving us insights into their work. I myself have shot a multitude of splash images, including many here as tutorials on Carl Taylor Education. I love the unpredictability of the moment, that combination of chaos theory and the science of photography. It truly is a fascinating genre. So splash photography is a technique that can add a certain degree of professionalism to your portfolio. Yes, it requires some patience and practice, but the most basic of splash shots can actually be achieved with little more than your camera, a speed light and some diffusion material. However, you can also go much further, where things can get very messy, or where I show you how to incorporate splashes into product shots for professional results. But I've put together the most important techniques and tips here to get you started. Splash photography kit. Whether you're photographing a simple splash shot or something more advanced, the equipment you'll need is roughly the same. I'll go through each one and why. The first one is a tripod. I wouldn't recommend shooting splash photography handheld, not unless you want the added difficulty of movement, so a good tripod is essential. Having your camera in a fixed position means you can set everything up, pre-focus and just shoot. If you don't have an assistant, you'll need both hands, one for creating your splash and one for pressing the shutter button. But with a tripod, you can also work with a remote trigger, allowing you to create the splashes. Number 2, light. Flash duration is the most important thing when it comes to your lighting and freezing the splash sharp, but I'll discuss this more later in this video. If you don't have studio lights with fast flash duration, speed lights can work just as well. I use speed lights for a lot of my early splash photography. However, they do need to be used at lower power settings to get the fast flash duration. At 1/16th power, you can get a T0.1 measurement of approximately 1/6000th of a second flash duration. But using them at low power does mean you may need to cluster a few speed lights together to get sufficient light, which is why it's of course easier to use more powerful studio lights that have fast flash durations. Number 3, diffusion material. Diffusion material, whether it be diffusion paper or a piece of acrylic, is useful to have on hand for a few reasons. Both can be used either as a background for your shot or to diffuse the light, resulting in more pleasing reflections on liquids like paint or better gradations in transparent liquids. Number 4, protective plastic. Splash photography can get messy, so it's worth protecting your camera, especially if you're shooting with paint. I often use clear polythene sheeting, which, although thin, does a great job of protecting against the odd splash of water or paint. But depending on how crazy your shoot is, this can also be used for covering any exposed electrical points or lights and your floor area. You can also double layer thicker plastic on the floor and walls for really messy shoots. Number 5, microfiber cloths and paper towels. As you've seen, things can get messy. I often keep microfiber cloths and paper towels on hand when photographing liquids, as you'll see in many of our tutorials. They can be used for wiping down surfaces or cleaning glass. If you're shooting in a tank, then a squeegee is another useful piece of kit to quickly remove water droplets from glass. If you're going crazy, then dustpans, mops, and even wet and dry vacuums make a big difference to the cleanup operation. A triggering device. Timing is key for splash shots, and although I've done many of my shots just by eye, there are times when a triggering device, such as a sound or motion trigger, can be very beneficial. This can also free you up if you're working on your own and you need to throw the objects to create the crash or splash. So let's look at how to capture a splash photo. First, I'd consider creating your own pre-visual for the shot that you want to achieve. This really helps you with planning and working things out. Things like where the splash is going to happen, what shape it's going to be, and how are you going to make that liquid end up where you want it. It will also get you thinking about how much liquid you need and how much mess might be made. Have you covered your camera and moved electrical cables out of the way before you start shooting? Remember, the process does take time and there is a lot of variables that can happen with liquids, which is what makes it so exciting. It requires patience as well as a little bit of luck, but pre-visualizing your image will give you the best chance of success. To further enhance your chance of success, there are a few techniques you will need to use to get a good shot. These include using a fast flash duration, locking your mirror up, and choosing the right camera settings and pre-focusing. Let's start with fast flash duration. One of the key things for capturing high-speed, fast-flying liquids is a fast flash duration. A common mistake that people make when photographing splash shots is focusing on what shutter speed they should be using. In actual fact, it is the speed and the duration of the burst of flash that freezes the motion, not the shutter speed. The shutter speed is barely relevant at all in a darkened studio and only needs to be set to a high enough speed to cut out bright ambient surroundings. Flash duration is the length of time of the burst of light that is emitted from a studio light or from a speed light. This can vary depending on the type of light and even from brand to brand. The faster the flash duration, the better. Flash duration is often measured in two ways, T0.5 and T0.1. The former is the most commonly displayed by manufacturers as it generally sounds more impressive. However, T0.5 does not measure all of the light relevant for the complete shot. Approximately 40% of the flash burst is unaccounted for in T0.5 readings. This is because T0.5 measurements portray a much faster but false impression of the real usable flash burst. T0.1 readings, on the other hand, account for nearly the entire flash burst. And as an example, if a flash has a T0.1 reading of 1/5000th of a second, then this would be very fast and it would be equivalent to almost 1/15,000th with a T0.5 measurement. So don't be fooled when comparing flash duration speed. Always check if you're comparing like for like, such as T0.5 or T0.1 measurements. To learn more about flash duration, T0.1 and T0.5 measurements and the sort of speeds needed for some of the fastest flash captures, then visit our lighting theory and equipment section on Carl Taylor Education. Here you'll find classes dedicated to that particular section, understanding flash duration. Mirror lockup mode. Many of you may be familiar with using the mirror lock up feature on a DSLR camera. This is to increase sharpness during long exposures. It's actually to stop the flipping up mirror from causing unnecessary vibrations. But this feature can also be used to reduce the delay time when activating the shutter taking the photo. This is very useful when photographing splash shots because things happen so fast that the less delay there is in activating the shutter, the better. Mirror lock up flips the mirror up before the shutter opens, which means that when you press the shutter button, you immediately capture the photo rather than having the delay of waiting for the mirror to get out of the way. However, enabling mirror lockup means that because the mirror is already up, you're unable to see anything when you look through the viewfinder because what you normally see is a reflection of the mirror going through the prism to your eye. When that mirror is locked up, then of course there is no view possible unless you have the ability to activate live view on the preview screen on the back of the camera. But not being able to see anything isn't really that much of a problem, because you should have already worked out on your camera and tripod where the action is going to happen and aiming to make it happen at that precise point. Camera settings. Now, as with any genre of photography, there are no universal camera settings that will result in a great photo. However, there are a few key points that you should keep in mind when choosing your camera settings. Now, I've touched on shutter speeds earlier, so you already know that it isn't the shutter speed that freezes the movement in splash shots. However, that doesn't mean that you should be shooting at 1/10 of a second. Ideally, you want the highest sync speed that your camera will allow. Medium format cameras can sync at nearly any speed, right up to 2,000th of a second. But for 35mm cameras, this is usually a maximum of 1/200th of a second. What is important though is that your shutter speed is fast enough to cut out any ambient light such as natural light or the existing room lighting. To do this, take a shot without the flash and see the results on the back of the screen. You should have a black image. If you see any light in the photo, then you'll need to increase your shutter speed or turn down the lighting in the room. Only when your image is black without any flash can you be sure that you won't have any blur on your liquids from the additional exposure of ambient light. For your aperture, I'd recommend shooting at around f11 to f16, as you want to ensure that you have sufficient depth of field that the entirety of your water splash will be in focus. The ISO should be fairly low. I try to keep mine at 100 wherever I can. However, as you're shooting at lower flash powers, especially if using speed lights, you may need to increase this ISO speed. You'll have to judge this as you shoot, but most modern cameras can yield low noise even at 400 and 800 ISO. Where you focus in the image, especially if you've got the mirror locked up, is a question that I get asked a lot. For splash photography, it's best to pre-focus where you anticipate the action to happen, and then switch to manual focus and leave it set there. Remember, you've already locked the camera on a tripod, so the only thing that can change is where the splash is going to happen. And you'll never have time to focus on it when it's actually happening, so don't even try. Save yourself a lot of headaches and pre-focus. You can do this by placing an item temporarily where you expect the action to happen, or I get my assistant to hold their hand roughly in the position. If you don't have an assistant, use a lighting stand, a chair, or anything you like that will help you lock that focus. If you'd like to see an easy to achieve splash shot where I get professional results with just one speed light and some homemade stuff, then you can watch this video and the link to it is below. If you'd like to see me capture this shot with a couple of Cirrus Studio lights, then I'll also put the link to that video below. But if you really want to up your game and learn how the top-end stuff is done, then you'll find those videos on my website at carltayloreducation.com. I hope you found this video useful, and give us a thumbs up if you did. Thanks for listening. Get my completely free photography course with no sign-up required. You can also access our free 90-page ebook. Just click the link or go to carltayloreducation.com.